Story number 1. The Rite That Never Ended. Dusk settled over the farmland like a slow exhale, and as the final rays of sun slipped away behind darkening clouds, the old house loomed on the horizon. From a distance, it could have been a quaint postcard scene, a large, sprawling farmhouse with a pitched roof, a wraparound porch, and acres of pasture dotted with the silhouettes of broken fences and ragged outbuildings. But as the Miller family pulled up in their truck, the closer they got, the heavier the air seemed. Even the wind in the tall grass around them sounded muted, as though something watched from beyond the twisted tree line. The house dated back to the early 1900s, according to the deed, but its true history was murky. The realtor said it had been vacant for years, left behind by a string of owners who couldn't maintain the property. For the Millers, Peter, his wife Angela, and their 2 children, 11-year-old Seth and 7-year-old Emily, this was a chance at a fresh start. A new life away from the city, away from the frustrations of cramped apartments and endless traffic. The price was right, unbelievably so. Too good, maybe, but they were too excited about the dream of open land to question it deeply. From the moment they arrived on that July evening, the house seemed to stare back at them with empty windows. Like it was assessing them. Seth leapt out of the truck first, inhaling the country air with a grin, but then his expression faltered. "It smells weird," he said, voice low. Angela teased him about farm smells, manure, old hay. Emily clutched the doll, eyes wide at the tall grass rippling in the breeze. "I like it," she said, but her tone carried a hint of uncertainty. Peter felt his stomach flutter with nerves as he jiggled the old key in the rusted lock. The door opened with a groan, revealing an entryway coated in dust. Wooden floors stretched into a large sitting room, a staircase curling upstairs. In the fading light, shadows crowded the corners. The interior air felt stale, tinged with a faint musty odor that reminded Peter of an old church basement. Angela flicked a light switch, surprising them when the overhead lamp in the foyer actually turned on. The realtor said the electricity had been turned off for years, but perhaps someone reconnected it recently. Or so they assumed. They set about unloading boxes, each footstep echoing on the ancient floorboards. Night soon replaced twilight, the farmland outside dark except for the faint glow of the moon. Seth and Emily claimed rooms upstairs, choosing them in excitement but returning to the ground floor frequently for dinner and comfort. They all gathered in the old dining room with takeout pizza, the only modern items in an otherwise antique-laden space. Tall wooden chairs flanked a long table, dusty drapes hung from the windows, letting in slivers of moonlight. "Here's to our new home," Peter said, raising a paper cup. The others joined in, though Angela's gaze drifted to the gloom beyond the wide windows. The open fields lay out there, silent. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That first night was restless for them all. Emily insisted on sleeping in Seth's room, too unsettled to stay alone. The walls seemed to creak and groan, the ancient pipes moaning at random intervals. At around midnight, Angela and Peter awoke to a thump in the hallway. Another thump followed, like footsteps on the old boards. Peter thought it might be Seth or Emily wandering, so he got up, stepping into the hallway. It was empty, the children's door closed. The chill in the corridor raised goosebumps on his arms. He returned to bed, unsettled. By morning, the dread felt like a bad dream. The bright sun revealed the land in a friendlier light, acres of tall grass swaying, an old barn leaning near the rear fence line, a few scattered cow skeletons in the distance. The family busied themselves with unpacking, exploring. Seth found old farm tools in a dusty shed, crowing about rusted scythes and a broken plow. Emily stayed by Angela, refusing to stray far. "The grass is scary," she muttered. Angela tried comforting her, saying they'd cut the field soon. But she felt uneasy too, noticing the grass seemed to rustle even when no breeze blew. Days passed. The house gave up more secrets. A locked door at the back of the pantry that Peter pried open, revealing a narrow staircase down to a root cellar. The cellar was half collapsed, the walls earthen and damp. He found half-burnt candles on a makeshift altar, old symbols carved into the dirt. That's when he first suspected something off about the house's past, maybe a cult or bizarre religious practice. He joked about it to Angela, but she saw the tension in his eyes. They told the kids to stay out of the cellar, claiming it was too dangerous. Secretly, Peter wondered if the previous owners dabbled in something unsavory. The nights remained uneasy. Around 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., footsteps would clomp across the upstairs hallway, or faint knocking at the walls would stir them from sleep. Angela heard voices murmuring from the fields outside her window but saw nothing. She'd gaze out at the moonlit grass, swearing it shifted like a living sea. But each morning, the illusions faded under the sun. Then, on the 5th day, Seth found something disturbing near the far edge of the property, a circle of charred ground, half-buried bones around it. He rushed back to show Peter and Angela. Peter recognized the remains of small animals, goats, maybe? Or something else. The char marks indicated a fire pit. The arrangement of stones suggested a ritual circle. "Gross," Seth said, voice tremulous. Emily clung to Angela, eyes wide. Angela fought a sudden wave of nausea, an image flashing of those carved symbols in the root cellar. Peter tried to stay calm, but he felt the hair on his neck bristling. They decided to report it to the local sheriff. The sheriff came out, scratched his head, grumbled about possible animal sacrifice from teenagers messing around. He took some pictures, promised to look into it. That was that. But the next night, the terror escalated. Around midnight, every floorboard in the house seemed to creak at once. A dull boom echoed from the barn out back, rattling the windows. Peter and Angela shot upright, hearts pounding. The kids screamed from upstairs. Rushing to them, Peter found the hallway lights flickering, casting the walls in strobes of light and dark. The children sobbed about a man in the hallway, a man in black clothes with no face. "He looked at us," Emily whimpered, "but he didn't have eyes." Angela swept him into her arms. They heard more knocks at the windows downstairs, distinct, rhythmic, like someone tapping. Peter eased downstairs with a flashlight, Angela behind him, the kids locked in their bedroom. The living room window revealed only darkness beyond. Another knock at the kitchen window. He darted there, shining the flashlight out. Nothing, just tall grass shifting. Then a shape parted the grass, a silhouette of a hunched figure. Peter's breath froze. Before he could even comprehend it, the figure melted back into the field. Another boom from the barn. He felt paralyzed. At dawn, exhaustion pressed on them. Angela threatened to leave. "This place isn't safe," she hissed, eyes red from sleeplessness. Peter tried to reassure her, but truth was, he felt the same. They decided to put the property up for sale. This dream of farmland turned into a nightmare. But that day, no real estate agent would come out, everyone was booked or claimed the route was too far. The next day, torrential rains battered them, turning the yard into muck. They were stuck. That evening, the footsteps returned, heavier and more purposeful, up and down the hall at random. The doorknobs rattled. The children sobbed, refusing to leave Angela's side. At around 2 a.m., a voice whispered through the walls, "Join us, complete the rite," in an unearthly hush. Angela nearly fainted hearing it. Peter grabbed a baseball bat, rage overshadowing fear. He stomped downstairs, yelling for whoever it was to show themselves. He found no one, just the front door wide open, letting in a swirl of wet night air. And out in the yard, a faint glow in the fields. He stepped onto the porch, eyes straining. In the distance, lights flickered, a ring of small fires among the tall grass. Human shapes, or something like them, circled the flames. Peter's knees shook. He retreated inside, slamming the door, locks rattling. The entire house felt alive with tension. The children clung to Angela, tears streaming. No phone line, no cell signal. They were alone, at the mercy of this cursed place. Before dawn, an unholy chanting drifted from outside, seeping through the walls. The words were alien, guttural, yet vaguely human. The flames in the fields glowed brighter. Angela felt a compulsion to walk out there, as if a voice in her head beckoned. She fought it, trembling. The children moaned in their restless sleep, haunted by nightmares. The next day, the final day, the family resolved to flee on foot if necessary. The car refused to start, the battery inexplicably dead. They packed essentials into backpacks, planning to trek to the main road. But as they stepped off the porch, the grass parted, revealing a group of silent figures standing among the weeds. Men, women, and children, all in old-time farm clothes, their eyes vacant. They formed a half-ring around the yard, blocking any path forward. Angela screamed, pulling the kids back. The figures just stared, unmoving. From behind them, another group approached the house from the barn side, similarly dressed, similarly hollow-eyed. They pressed in, slowly forcing the Millers back into the house. The silent watchers parted only to let the family pass inside, then crowded the door, preventing escape. In despair, Peter locked every door, every window. The watchers formed a circle around the house, standing in the midday sun with unnatural stillness. Hours crawled by intense dread, the watchers never moving, never blinking. The kids asked, "Why won't they go away?" No one had an answer. That night, the watchers lit torches in the yard. Their chanting resumed, a low droning that filled the air with dread. The family huddled in the living room, all lights on. Then, from the root cellar door, came a series of knocks. Slow, deliberate. Angela shrieked. The door they'd left sealed with nails, but now it rattled as if pounded from within. "They want us down there," Peter whispered, voice shaking. Suddenly, the watchers outside pressed up against the windows, their faces blank. The door handle jiggled. Then the front door flew open, as if forced by an invisible wind. The watchers spilled in, each face contorted in an expression of sorrow or mania. The children screamed. Peter brandished the baseball bat. "Stay back," he roared. But they advanced silently, unstoppable. A presence loomed behind them, the shape of a tall, robed figure stepping in from the porch. Its face was wrapped in a coarse cloth, no features visible. The watchers parted, letting this figure approach the Millers. In a voice both ancient and hollow, it spoke, "You have come, we complete to write anew." Peter swung the bat wildly, but the watchers seized his arms, pinned him. Angela and the children cried, struggling, but more watchers gripped them in a vice of cold hands. The robed figure lifted a bony hand, pointing toward the kitchen, toward the pantry leading to the root cellar. The watchers dragged the family across the creaking floor, the door to the cellar bursting open of its own accord. A rush of stale air hit them, reeking of old earth and rot. The chanting began, from all throats, an echo of that ancient, guttural language. The watchers forced the Millers down the wooden steps, each creak a funeral drumbeat. The flickering lights from the watchers' torches revealed the same carvings on the earthen walls, symbols of a dark ritual. In the center, a ring of old stones encircled a pit or well. The robed figure descended last, overshadowing them. Terror overwhelmed Angela, she clutched Emily, sobbing. Seth clung to Peter, who wrestled uselessly against the watcher's grip. The robed figure began an incantation, voice echoing in the cramped space. The watchers formed a circle around the pit, the family trapped inside. The chant reached a crescendo, and from the pit rose a foul stench, as if something stirred beneath the earth. In that desperate moment, Angela noticed a small detail. One watcher's face bore fresh tears, like a glimmer of humanity trying to break through. She locked eyes with it, pleading silently. The watcher trembled, lips quivering as if fighting the ritual's pull. Then, with a sudden jerk, it lunged at the robed figure, knocking it off balance. The chanting faltered. Another watcher cried out, confusion rippling through them. Peter seized the chance. He wrenched free of the watcher's grip. Angela grabbed Emily, yanking Seth forward. In the chaos, they scrambled back up the stairs. The watchers reeled, some stuck in a daze, others trying to catch them. The robed figure roared in that guttural tone, but the tide had shifted momentarily. They burst into the kitchen, hearts pounding. Another group of watchers tried to block the front door, but the family veered to a side window, smashing through the glass with a chair. Shards flew. They crawled out, lacerating arms, but adrenaline numbed the pain. Outside, under the moon and torchlight, watchers circled, but the confusion from inside spread. Some watchers faltered, uncertain. Peter grabbed the children, and Angela ran behind them, weaving between watchers. She glimpsed the robed figure emerging from the house, its cloth face undone, revealing a monstrous visage of shriveled flesh and hollow sockets. It shrieked, pointing a bony finger. The watchers stiffened, attempting to close ranks again, but the family was already sprinting across the field. The grass parted like waves, the earth trembling under the watchers' pursuit. They ran until their lungs burned, until the watchers' torches were distant flickers, the chanting a distant moan. Only then did they slow, collapsing in exhaustion. Dawn found them stumbling across a dusty road, flagged down by a passing farm truck. The farmer, wide-eyed at their battered appearance, helped them. They recounted a horrifying tale. The farmer, pale, murmured that the old farm was rumored cursed. Many families tried living there, none stayed. In the following days, the Millers contacted the authorities. But when sheriff's deputies visited the property, they found only an empty farmhouse and an overgrown yard. No sign of watchers or robed figures. The root cellar looked innocent, no runic carvings. The pit was a simple hole for old vegetables. The deputies suggested the family must have experienced a group hallucination or a traumatic break. The case was dropped. The Millers left town, returning to the city. They sold the property for a pittance, not caring who took it. The new owners never moved in, though, the rumor is, they visited once and put the land back on the market. Now, the Millers live in a modest suburb. The children suffer nightmares, their screams echoing in the night. Angela can't stand the smell of old wood or damp earth. Peter, once optimistic and adventurous, rarely smiles. Sometimes, he sees dark shapes in the corner of his eye, as if the watchers followed them. He wonders if the ritual remains incomplete, if it might find a way to drag them back. Every so often, a traveling real estate agent or curious tourist sees an ad for a quaint, affordable farm property set on rolling hills in need of minor renovation. But if they visit at dusk, the footprints they leave might vanish, replaced by the hush of ancient floors and the faint echo of chanting from the fields. Because that cursed farm is always waiting for new blood to complete the old rite. The watchers never truly left. And once you enter those rotting doors, the final ceremony, begun decades ago, might claim your soul to join the ranks of silent victims forever. Story number 2. The cornfield with no exit. They say the corn grows taller in the heart of this rural county, as if the earth itself is trying to blot out the sky. I never believed it, thought it was just local boastful talk. But that was before I stepped into those rows, the day I went hunting and found a place that twists upon itself, a place that breathes and shifts like a living beast. My name is Adam Graves, and if you're reading this, heed my warning, stay away from that endless green labyrinth, or you might never see the world outside again. It began as a simple hunting trip. Early October, the leaves turning gold and red on the country roads. The morning light was crisp when I left my house before dawn, crossbow stowed in the back of my pickup, intent on bagging a few pheasants. My usual spot had been stripped by new farmland expansion, so I decided to drive deeper into farmland territory, following winding gravel roads I'd never traveled. The sun inched above the horizon, warming the fields. A perfect day, or so I thought. 2 hours in, I spotted a sign for a country store. I stopped to grab a thermos coffee, chat with the local clerk. He was an older man, face carved by time. When I told him I was looking for good hunting land, he pointed vaguely down the road. Plenty of fields out by Blackwater Farm, he said. Though folks around here don't like going near the old property line. Something off about it. He shrugged, as if not wanting to elaborate. I laughed, chalking it up to small-town superstition. I drove further, the farmland unfurling in patchwork fields. Eventually, I saw an overgrown side road marked by a battered mailbox reading Blackwater in faded paint. A barbed wire fence ran along a wide cornfield, tall, healthy stalks swaying gently. Perfect cover for pheasants, I figured. The gate was open, no signs forbidding entry. The morning was so bright, the sky an endless blue. I turned in, parked near a leaning shed. The air smelled of soil and sweet corn. I grabbed my gear, hopped out. If there was a property owner, I'd keep an eye out to ask permission, but no one appeared. The place looked deserted. The corn towered over me, 8-9 feet tall, the tassels brushing at the wind. I found a path or tractor road leading into the field, well worn, as though used. The stalks rustled in a lulling hush. Crossbow in hand, I stepped in, thinking I'd skirt the edges, see if any birds flushed. My phone read 8:15 a.m., plenty of time to roam. The first few rows parted easily around me, the light filtering through the green. The hush was strangely complete, no insects droning, no birdsong. Just the rustle of leaves. I ventured deeper, scanning the ground for tracks, occasionally pushing aside cornstalks. About 30 yards in, I heard a quick shuffle, some small creature scurrying. My heart leaped with excitement, hoping to spot a pheasant or rabbit. But nothing showed. A faint, uneasy sensation prickled at the back of my mind. The air felt heavier, the light dimmer. Could the sky be clouding over? After maybe half an hour, I tried circling back to the truck. But the rows didn't look the same, the path behind me seemed gone. Must have gotten turned around, I muttered, though I was sure I'd come in a straight line. I reversed course, pushing back the way I'd come, or so I thought. The stalks parted in an identical row, leading deeper. Soon I realized I was wandering in circles. My phone's compass read an erratic NS, flipping at random. The GPS had zero signal. A chill slithered down my spine. The sun overhead seemed weaker, as though the day had advanced more than I realized. No, that was impossible. My watch read barely 9 a.m., yet the light felt like late afternoon. I told myself to keep calm, find an edge, keep walking in one direction. Basic orienteering. So I picked a direction, used the sun's position as a guide, and walked. But the rows twisted, diverting me. I kept a hand on the cornstalks, trying to keep a straight line, but the ground sloped unexpectedly. My sense of direction wavered. Each time I parted the stalks, I found new rows at angles that didn't match the geometry of a normal field. Time blurred. My watch read 10 a.m., 11 a.m., but the sky overhead remained in a strange half-light. No direct sun, just a hazy glow. My water supply was still good, but anxiety ballooned. I forced myself to mark my path, snapping a piece of cloth on a stalk. But minutes later, I found the same cloth marking a different row, as if the field rearranged or I'd circled back. Either way, it made no sense physically. At noon, I paused to drink water, heart pounding. The hush was absolute, no rustle of animals, no wind. The tall cornstalk soared, forming walls too thick to see beyond. My phone's clock read 12:05, but the battery drained alarmingly fast. 30% left, then 20%, like something was sucking the power. My gut twisted with dread. Then I glimpsed movement in my peripheral vision, a shape drifting among the stalks. I whipped my crossbow up. "Hello?" My voice fell flat. The shape paused, looked vaguely human, or maybe it was a trick of the leaves. Then it vanished silently. My scalp prickled. Could it be someone messing with me? Another hunter? I called out, "I'm lost, can you help me?" No reply, just the faint rustle of leaves. My heart hammered. I pressed on, crossing a small clearing. The corn parted into an open circle maybe 20 feet wide. In the center stood a scarecrow, ragged and old, arms outstretched. I approached warily, noticing dried cornstalks woven around it, the face not a simple burlap sack but a carved chunk of wood with a crude expression. Something about it felt malignant. The eyes were painted black, mouth gaping. A crow perched on the scarecrow's shoulder, silent. As I stepped closer, the crow took flight, disappearing over the corn. The stillness returned. I snapped a photo with my phone out of reflex, but the screen glitched, producing a blurred image. No matter how many times I tried, it wouldn't focus. That's when I noticed the ground around the scarecrow, footprints, many footprints, circling it. Some looked fresh, others old, all pressed into the dusty soil. People had stood here recently, or over time, a gathering. My chest tightened. A shape flickered at the clearing's edge, tall, vaguely human, stepping behind a row. My heart seized. I shouted, "Wait! Who are you?" Rushing that way, I found only swaying stalks. Fear knotted my stomach. Something was definitely in here with me. Possibly multiple somethings. The hush weighed heavier, like a living presence. Then I heard it, a faint whispering, too low to catch words, drifting on the still air. I ran from the clearing, trying to push through the corn in a straight line, ignoring the rows. The stalks whipped my arms, the soil sloped unpredictably, forcing me to zigzag. My breath came in ragged gulps, sweat soaking my shirt. After who knows how long, I burst out into a wide lane, like a dirt path between two large sections of corn. I exhaled relief, scanning for direction. But the lane stretched in both ways identically. No sign of an exit. The hush prevailed. Then, from the right, a figure strolled into view, someone wearing a wide-brimmed hat, face in shadow. My heart leapt with hope. "Hey!" I called. "I'm lost." The figure turned, revealing an impossibly pale face with blank eyes. My voice caught. Slowly, the figure retreated into the corn. Fear hammered in my chest. Was that even human? I decided left was my best bet, so I trotted that direction, crossbow in hand. The lane meandered, flanked by endless green walls, the overhead sky a dull haze. My watch said 2 p.m., but it felt like dusk. The oppressive gloom never lifted. I was panting, thirst building. Just as I thought to rest, a new horror, voices rose from the corn, whimpers, sobs, echoing around me. My mind flashed with the possibility, are they victims? People trapped like me? Desperate, I shouted, "I'm here." "Where are you?" The voices hushed, then resumed from a different row, quieter, an almost mocking call. They're leading me deeper, I realized. My stomach churned. Could they be ghosts, illusions? Maybe the lost souls rumored to die in these fields? I pressed on, ignoring them. Time lost meaning. My watch read 4 p.m., but the sky overhead was a perpetual twilight. Twice I found more footprints in dusty patches, some fresh, some half-faded. Once, I stumbled upon an old jacket. No ID, just a name sewn inside the collar, Lewis. The pockets contained a phone, dead, and a wallet with a driver's license from 3 states over. My heart sank. Another lost soul? Eventually, the lane ended abruptly. No path, just a wall of corn. My phone was nearly dead. I had no choice but to re-enter the labyrinth. Each step I took, the hush seemed to intensify. Then the whispering returned, swirling around me. Indistinct words, laced with sorrow or menace. Night enveloped the field again, or so it seemed. The gloom thickened. I found a small clearing near a dead tree trunk in the midst of the corn. Exhausted, I sank down, tears pricking my eyes. The crossbow felt useless. The wind was absent, the air dead. The corn hissed softly as if it breathed. My phone died for good, leaving me with only the faint glow of my flashlight, which also flickered ominously. Sometime in that oppressive darkness, shapes emerged around the clearing, figures in old-time clothes, spectral outlines. They formed a ring, faces blurred, moaning in unison. My mind screamed. They were the lost souls, or illusions of them. One stepped forward, a woman with her face half-decayed, eyes luminous with sorrow. She raised a trembling hand, pointing at me. Her mouth opened in a silent wail. The other shapes advanced, corners of their mouths parted in twisted expressions. I clutched my crossbow, but how do you fight ghosts? Then, in the center of the clearing, the scarecrow I'd seen earlier manifested, or an identical effigy, ragged, with that carved wooden head. The shapes knelt around it, chanting in a language older than time, the corn behind them shifting in arcs of shadow. I realized it was a ritual, replaying the final moments of these souls. Perhaps they'd been sacrificed to something that lived in or was the field. My heart hammered. If I remained, I'd become part of this endless cycle. In a blind panic, I rushed forward, scattering the shapes. Their forms flickered, some dissolving into motes of dust. I burst through a row of corn, ignoring the whipping leaves. The ground underfoot felt spongy, like layers of old husks. My breath rasped, spots dancing in my vision from lack of rest. I refused to stop. The hush was replaced by a mounting roar in my ears, like wind, except no wind blew. Could it be the field itself raging? I stumbled on a root, nearly fell. Then, unbelievably, I saw a flicker of headlights through the stalks. Headlights? Could it be a road? Summoning my last reserves of energy, I barreled ahead, forcing the leaves aside. A single step, two, and I burst onto a paved shoulder. A car sped by, horn blaring in surprise. I collapsed, gasping. I was on the main highway, the bright headlights of passing vehicles streaking by. Shaking, I turned to look behind me. The corn parted maybe 3 feet from the asphalt, an innocuous row. No trace of the labyrinth I'd wandered, no clearing, no shapes. It looked like any normal farm field, except my footprints in the mud leading out. The hush lingered for a heartbeat, then the normal nighttime chirp of crickets resumed. Dumbfounded, I staggered to the roadside, flagged down a passing driver. He found me trembling, half-crazed. I stammered about a cursed cornfield, but the driver, a local, just frowned. "That's old man Wilcox's place," he said. "Hasn't farmed it in years. People say it's haunted." I nodded, shaking, tears welling. "Take me, you please, anywhere," I begged. The driver dropped me at a small diner in the next town. My story to the local police was met with polite skepticism. A few folks gave me haunted glances, muttering about old legends of a cornfield that devours the lost. The sheriff visited the farmland the next day but found nothing but an overgrown field, no sign of a labyrinth or ghostly shapes. He gently suggested counseling. I left town, determined never to return. Now, I can't sleep without nightmares of tall green walls shifting in the darkness, of silent figures chanting around a scarecrow effigy. My crossbow remains locked away, never to be used. On quiet nights, I recall the hush of that field, the vines seemingly breathing. I wonder how many have vanished there, their last moments replayed forever among the rustling leaves. So if you ever find yourself on a lonely back road in rural farmland, and your GPS leads you to a towering wall of corn, think twice before stepping off the beaten path. Because beyond those rows, the stalks might close around you, twisting passages that defy logic. And if you see a scarecrow with a carved wooden head, or hear a distant chanting under the moon's pale light, run. Don't wait to see the ghosts of the ones who came before, longing to lure you deeper. Because in that cursed cornfield, time and reality warp, and once you're claimed by the endless green, there may be no exit, just an eternal hush, repeating your final terror for all who might follow. Story number 3. The Village That Never Left. There's an odd hush that settles over empty farmland at dusk, a hush deeper than any city quiet. That was the first warning sign we should have heeded, the complete absence of normal countryside noise, no crows cawing, no crickets chirping, no distant lowing of cattle. But we were too focused on the thrill of discovery, too drunk on the romance of wandering rural roads, to listen to that hush. We were 5 in total, me, named Ethan Miller, a freelance documentarian, Carmen, an anthropology grad student with a keen sense of local lore, Aaron, our quiet but capable medic, Leah, a location scout always in search of hidden spots for film shoots, and Travis, my best friend since childhood who'd roped me into half a dozen misadventures before. We'd heard rumors of an abandoned village that never quite made the map, rumored to be left behind decades ago by its entire population in a single day. One local said it was a ghost village, another called it a cursed place. Of course, we dismissed those claims as superstition. We set out on a bright autumn morning, 2 cars packed with gear, tents, cameras, recording equipment, enough supplies for a few nights if we found the place interesting. Our plan was straightforward: navigate the lesser-used county roads, rely on a mixture of rumor, old farmland maps, and Carmen's knack for sniffing out half-remembered local legends. We expected to find a cluster of decaying buildings, maybe gather some footage, then move on. For most of the day, everything was normal. We passed through small towns with quaint diners, farmland rolling out for miles. Gradually, the roads turned to gravel, then to dirt, winding between overgrown hedgerows. The sky grew overcast, dulling the sunlight. Travis cursed at the GPS losing signal. Carmen tried her phone's offline map. "We should be close," she murmured, scanning the horizon. A rumor said the village perched near a wooded creek in the middle of farmland, no real roads leading in. The owners parted with the land decades ago. We almost didn't see it at first. One moment we were trundling along a dirt lane that cut between fields of tall, yellowing grass. The next we spotted the silhouette of a peaked roof and a small wooden church steeple. "That's it," Leah breathed, excitement warring with a sudden, unspoken caution. The lane curved into what looked like a wide clearing, like a main street with houses on either side. Except it was quiet. So quiet. From the vantage of our cars, it looked like a normal, if old-fashioned, village street, maybe 8 or 9 houses on each side, plus a small church at the far end, a couple of barns, a few outbuildings. The houses were spaced out, each with a small yard. The roofs looked intact, the paint on some still fresh. Odd for a place rumored abandoned decades ago. We parked near what seemed like a general store building, hopped out. The hush struck immediately. No wind, no insects, no birds overhead. The sky's overcast gloom gave the afternoon a twilight feel. "Creepy," Aaron said quietly. Travis forced a laugh. "Just a quiet day, guys. Let's see if there's any sign of squatters." The main street was packed dirt, grass poking through. We saw no fresh tire tracks. We advanced with the typical curiosity of explorers, me filming with a handheld camera, Carmen snapping photos. The first building, a modest house, had a wooden porch. I tested the door, expecting it to be locked or jammed by time. But it swung open easily, revealing a living room that looked, well, lived in. The furniture was upright, dust only lightly coating surfaces. A single lamp on a side table was turned on, shining a dim yellow glow. But the electricity in an abandoned village? My neck hair prickled. Travis and Leah joined me. "Hello?" Travis called into the house. No response. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee. The kitchen beyond had a table set with plates, utensils, half-eaten food. Mold dotted the edges of the meal, but not enough to suggest decades of decay, like it was left maybe days or weeks ago. Yet the house's style and decor screamed 1950s or 60s at best, old appliances, retro wallpaper. We regrouped outside, exchanging uneasy glances. Carmen and Aaron confirmed the second house was the same, lights on, a meal in progress, a radio turned to static. No sign of living occupants. The entire street, building after building, was locked in a tableau of daily life paused mid-routine. A store had shelves lined with canned goods, a cash register open. Another house had a rocking chair on the porch, gently swaying. The church doors parted to reveal pews, hymn books left open, a small electric organ powered on. And always, that silence, like the world held its breath. No footprints, no sign of a struggle, just the sense that everyone vanished at the same moment, leaving their tasks unfinished. "Why are the lights on if it's decades old?" Leah muttered. "Could there be a generator?" But we heard no hum of machinery, no sign of an obvious power source. Despite the unnerving atmosphere, we decided to stay. Curiosity overcame caution. We pitched our tents near the center of town, though a few joked we could just check into one of the empty houses. But the idea of sleeping in a made bed abandoned by who knows who creeped us out. So we set up a small campsite in the middle of the street, near a water pump that still functioned, oddly enough. The sky darkened, the hush deepened. Night fell swiftly, the gloom turning the village's windows into black mirrors. Some houses still glowed from interior lamps, their soft illumination casting weird angles on the dust-laden furniture. We built a small campfire using scraps of fallen wood, cooking up a quick meal. No one felt like joking. The kids' bicycles on lawns, the half-finished diaries on dressers, it all weighed on us. Carmen found a battered journal in the church, dated 1961, references to a harvest rite. That triggered unpleasant images. Around 10 p.m., we heard the first sound, a distant creak, like a door opening. We froze, scanning the street. The door of a small cottage swung outward, though the night's breeze was minimal. Another door at a house further down banged shut. Our hearts pounded. Could be just wind, Travis hissed. But that hush returned, strangling the explanation. Midnight approached. We retreated to our tents, zipping them, though none of us expected real rest. I read a bit in my tent, reading from Carmen's phone about local legends. The name Harrow's End surfaced, a rumor of a cursed harvest event in the 1960s. But no official record. At around 1:30 a.m., I woke to a faint scraping outside. I peeked through the tent flap. The entire street seemed alive with subtle movements, shadows flitting behind windows, a flicker of light in the store. I heard footsteps on the old wooden porch across the street. Then the distinct squeak of a rocking chair in motion. My heart hammered. We'd seen that rocking chair earlier, empty. Now it squeaked steadily, as if someone rocked, yet no occupant was visible. I unzipped the tent fully, whispering for Travis. He also heard it. The night felt denser, the air colder. Another squeak, another footstep. Then quiet, so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Suddenly, a high-pitched moan rose from inside one of the houses. The front door banged open, and a shape stumbled onto the porch, a woman in a tattered 1950s dress, her hair pinned in a retro style, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. She looked at me directly, mouth opening as if to scream, but no sound emerged. Then, as fast as she appeared, she darted back inside, door slamming. The moan lingered, echoing along the street. We all convened, each of us shaken by sightings. Aaron had glimpsed a shadow in the store's window. Carmen heard a baby's cry from the church. The place was stirring with ghostly inhabitants. Yet they seemed ephemeral, half-real. At dawn, we found the street unchanged, except the footprints in the dust around certain houses. As if the watchers had come close to our tents, then retreated. The hush returned with daylight, burying the memory of nighttime horrors. Leah insisted we leave. But the route we'd driven in on, somehow it ended at a wide field, no sign of a proper road. The footprints from our vehicles ended abruptly. We walked the perimeter, hoping to see tire tracks, but nothing. The entire village was ringed by a sea of tall grass. The path had vanished. Fear clenched us. We decided to pack up, try crossing the fields. But the fields offered no landmarks, just rolling grass. After an hour of trudging in one direction, we found ourselves back at the same fence line, the same row of houses. I recall Carmen cursing, tears forming. We realized the place was a trap, folding space around us. The only option was to explore deeper, see if the houses might hold some clue or if a back lane existed. We split into pairs, me and Carmen, Travis and Leah, leaving Aaron at the campsite. We agreed to meet in 2 hours. Carmen and I tackled the southwestern row, stepping into each house in turn. The pattern repeated, half-finished meals, clocks stopped at random times, lights glowing, wardrobes full of old clothes. But each place had a second kind of presence, as though intangible residents lingered. In one house, a living room with crocheted blankets, we found a note pinned to the wall, "They took us in the harvest. We remain." Another house's kitchen had a calendar open to October 1962, with the date 15 circled in red. My camera captured pictures, but the images often came out blurred or with static. Carmen, flipping through an ancient diary, read entries about a rite of prosperity that villagers performed each autumn. The last entry: he demands more. The fields are hungry. We cannot refuse. A chill pierced my spine. After an hour, Carmen and I rejoined the group at the campsite. They had similar discoveries, references to a harvest rite, references to a being or entity associated with the corn harvest. People wrote about it as though it was a tradition, until something went wrong, maybe they sacrificed to it. Then an entire village vanished. Night came again. We tried barricading ourselves in the general store, hoping its thick walls might shield us from apparitions. We locked the door, turned on the interior lights, and huddled. The overhead fluorescence flickered uncertainly, though the entire electric grid here was unexplainable. The night stretched. At 2 a.m., the store door rattled. A child's voice whimpered, "Help me." We peered out the window, nobody. Another voice, an old man, said, "Open the door. We're lost." Leah almost did, but Aaron stopped her. "That's not real," he murmured. The voices repeated, in different tones, as if a chorus of trapped souls coaxing us. Then a wave of intense cold swept the store, frost creeping on the windows. A presence or entity was near. Suddenly, shapes pressed their faces against the glass, pale, slack-jawed forms in outdated clothing, eyes pleading or furious. They mouthed words we couldn't hear. The glass bowed inward as though from immense pressure. We cowered. Then, as quickly as it began, the shapes withdrew. The store door flew open on its own, and we saw a tall figure in the threshold, clad in patchwork garments of burlap and straw. Its face was a swirling mass of shadow, or perhaps a cornhusk mask. The sense of dread was overpowering. We fled out the back, the creature letting out a hollow moan. Outside, the entire village thrummed with ghostly activity, windows lighting up, silhouettes pacing the porches, moans echoing. In the center of the street, a ring of shadowy figures stood, chanting. At their center, a monstrous presence, tall as 2 men, crowned with corn husks. We recognized the entity from old scribbled references in diaries. The harvest devourer, or so the diaries hinted. This was the presence holding the souls hostage. Backed into a corner, we had no choice but to join that circle or be seized by the watchers. They parted as we approached, as though guiding us into the ritual. We trembled. The watchers' eyes glowed faintly in the gloom, each face blank with sorrow or malevolence. The creature in the middle raised a twisted staff, the chanting rose. We felt a pull, as if we were about to become part of this endless harvest. In a desperate move, Carmen remembered something from the diaries. They prayed to break the cycle, but none had the courage to burn the fields. She hissed, "We burn it. We burn the corn." The watchers reacted violently, but we seized the chance. Travis flicked open his lighter, set a nearby bale of dried cornstalks ablaze. The watchers shrieked, reeling away. The tall entity roared, lunging. Leah and I appended a barrel of lamp oil from the store's porch, letting it flow across the dusty ground. The flames spread rapidly, a wall of fire igniting along the nearest row of corn. The watchers wailed, dissolving into smoke or retreating into the shadows. The entity reeled, bellowing. The entire village trembled as flames licked the edges of houses. We sprinted away, choking on smoke, the watchers' shrieks blending with crackling embers. The ground felt as if it was fracturing beneath us, reality splitting open. Then, through the swirling smoke, we saw the tall grass parted, revealing the old road out, our vehicles parked as if waiting. Impossible. But we didn't question it. We tore across the threshold, jumped into our cars. The engine started, the headlights cut through drifting ash. As we sped away, the entire settlement behind us glowed with infernal light. The last we saw in our mirrors was the monstrous shape thrashing in the center of the burning houses, watchers screaming in silent agony. We drove until dawn, not speaking, hearts pounding. Eventually, we found the main highway, re-entering normal reality. No sign remained of that cursed place. Back home, we tried to reconcile what happened. The diaries we took as evidence turned to ash or crumbled into dust. Our footage was static. People asked about our trip, we said we found nothing. In nightmares, though, I see the watcher's eyes and hear their moans. The fields remain in my dreams, shifting, hungry. Did we truly free those souls by fire, or did we just enrage something older than time? None of us are sure. Carmen sometimes wonders if the village reappears in another location, a new ring of farmland, waiting for unsuspecting explorers. Because curses like that rarely die with a single blaze. We keep quiet now, each living with the guilt and terror of those we left behind. Even if we burned the village, the harvest devourer's presence may roam, seeking new fields, new ghosts. And if a lonely traveler stumbles on an unmarked settlement with half-finished meals on the tables, lights still glowing, he might become the next addition to the endless ritual. Because once you step into that silent street, you join the watchers, and the harvest never ends. Story number 4. Blooms of the Bewitched Field. It all started with the fragrance. A lush, sweet perfume that drifted across the gentle breeze of a late summer afternoon. At first, Miranda thought she was just imagining it. Wildflowers often had some faint aroma, but this was more potent, more insistent. It called to her, inviting her deeper into the sea of color before her, an unassuming field of wild blooms that stretched out behind her aunt's old farmhouse. She had come here looking for a moment of peace in the countryside, never suspecting the horror that waited among those vivid petals. Miranda had grown up in the city, where flowers were little more than the occasional rose bush on a lawn or the plucked, sad bouquets in a grocery store. So being among rolling acres of farmland felt almost dreamlike, wide horizons, endless sky, and meadows of blossoms in every hue. She'd arrived at her aunt's place that morning, lugging a battered suitcase and a few textbooks for her upcoming semester. Her parents insisted a summer in the country would help her relax after a rough year. It was supposed to be restful, a chance to recharge. But the moment she stepped off the porch and into the tall grass that afternoon, drawn by the gentle sway of wildflowers just beyond the fence, she sensed something was off. The air was too still, as if every bird and cricket had paused their song in anticipation. She brushed it off, maybe it was the hush of a lazy midday. The sun shone bright and warm, the breeze mild, blowing in from the distant woods. Then the smell found her, delicate at first, a mingling of lavender and honeysuckle. She closed her eyes, inhaling, thinking, what a lovely place. But behind that sweetness lay another layer, subtler and more complex, like the metallic tang of old pennies or something faintly rotten. She couldn't quite place it. Her nose wrinkled. By the time she noticed the undertone, it was too late. She was already immersed in the field, waist-deep in dense blooms. The flowers were gorgeous, daisies, black-eyed Susans, coneflowers, and some she didn't recognize, deep violet petals streaked with gold, forming star shapes that wavered in the sunlight. She bent to examine one, inhaling deeply. That was the moment the world shifted. Her vision blurred at the edges, colors intensifying, the sounds around her warping. She stood up, blinking, convinced she was dizzy from the heat. But the meadow around her suddenly seemed taller, the stalks rising above her shoulders, the sky receding into a pale wash of bluish white. She rubbed her eyes, disoriented. A wave of fear tingled in her chest. This was more than heat exhaustion. Her heart hammered as she realized she might be having some sort of reaction. Were these toxic plants? She tried stepping back, expecting to see the farmhouse roofline in the distance. But it was gone, replaced by an endless meadow that stretched in every direction. A swirl of panic. She turned in place, searching for the fence that she'd hopped over minutes ago. Nothing. Just blooms swaying. "Hello," she called, voice wavering. The only answer was a soft rustle, as if something moved behind the flowers. Adrenaline spiked. She realized she wasn't alone. She forced herself to walk, pushing aside the blossoms, trying to find an edge. But the field extended, row upon row of blossoms that all began to look the same, those bizarre star-shaped ones recurring more frequently. Their petals seemed to shift in color, purple one moment, deep blue the next, shimmering in the corner of her vision. Within minutes, her sense of direction splintered. She walked in what she thought was a straight line, but the swirl of color and that seductive, cloying fragrance muddled her. Her mind drifted, as if lulled by a lullaby. She had to concentrate on each step. But her thoughts kept slipping sideways, imagining shapes flickering between the blooms, glimpses of twisted figures or creeping limbs. She'd rationalize, it's just your imagination, some bizarre hallucination. But then she heard a low moan, soft as a breath, drifting by. Her heart clenched. She parted the flowers, found only more plants. Yet the moan repeated, as if someone was just ahead, in pain. Her arms prickled with goosebumps. "Who's there?" she managed, voice dry. No response. She stepped forward, determined to see if anyone needed help. Another moan, this time behind her. She spun, the perfume intensifying, invading her senses. Suddenly, a swirl of petals danced across her field of vision, an unnatural breeze carrying them. She coughed, each breath tasting sweet and rancid at once. Her head reeled. She blinked rapidly. Something dark flitted through the blooms, a shape low to the ground, scuttling like an animal. She choked back a scream, stifling it with her hand. She'd never believed in ghosts or monsters. But here, the line between reality and nightmare blurred in a swirl of petals. Fighting to remain calm, she told herself, "You can find the farmhouse." She tried again, pushing through the thickest part of the field. But every few steps, she spotted flickers of movement, figures with elongated limbs ducking behind flowers, shadows slipping away too quickly to identify. Her heart thumped. She realized with a sick certainty that the field was full of watchers, shapes weaving among the stems. The idea was insane. Yet she couldn't deny what she glimpsed, each time a little more real. The further she walked, the darker the sky grew. Time no longer followed logic. It felt like hours, but it might have been minutes. The sun's brightness dulled, replaced by a sullen gray, as if clouds thickened overhead. The perfume hung thick in the air, an invisible fog that scrambled her thoughts. Eventually, she broke into a small clearing of sorts. The flowers parted around a lone tree stump. On that stump lay a single white flower, its petals tinted red at the tips, as though stained with blood. Her pulse spiked again. But the strangest part was the stump's surface, carved with symbols that looked ancient, loops and jagged lines forming a spiral. Something about it felt deeply wrong, as though it resonated with the cursed air. A whisper sounded, so close to her ears she felt the breath of it. "She's come to stay." Her blood froze. She spun around wildly. No one there, just the trembling rows of flowers. She was sure the words were real, not just in her head. Near panic, she lifted her phone, thinking to call for help. No signal. Worse, the battery drained rapidly, down to 5%, then 3% in seconds. She cursed, opening the camera app, hoping to document something. The lens captured only static, flashes of color. Then the phone died, leaving her alone with the monstrous hush. She ran, no longer caring about method, just blind flight. The blossoms whipped her face, leaves slashed her arms. The smell grew stronger, clogging her lungs. She almost vomited from the overpowering sweetness. Her mind soared into partial delirium, half seeing monstrous faces in every nodding bloom. The moans and whispers escalated, voices weeping, crying out for release. She could make out their words sometimes: "Help us, don't let us fade, and join us, become ours." Her rational mind reeled. At some point, she tripped over something solid. She landed hard on her knees, realized with horror it was a human skeleton, half buried among the roots, tattered clothing still clinging. She scrambled backward, suppressing a shriek. The skull stared sightlessly, jaw parted in a final gasp. Next to it, more bones. She realized these were the remains of multiple people, scattered among the flowers. Trembling, she forced herself to her feet, tears burning her eyes. Then the blossoms around her began to sway in unison, as if a strong wind blew. But no breeze touched her cheeks. A shape drifted forward from among the petals, a twisted figure with hollow eye sockets, skin a pallid hue. It wore ragged clothing from another era, perhaps. As it parted the leaves, she saw flowers actually growing from its limbs, buds embedded in its flesh. The figure's mouth opened soundlessly, then the voice echoed in her head, "We are the flowers are us." She screamed. The figure advanced with agonizing slowness, each movement accompanied by a soft rustle of leaves. Others joined it, dozens or more, each a silent husk of a person with blossoms sprouting from their eyes, mouths, chests. They ringed her in, forming a circle of reanimated corpses or ghosts, each an enslaved soul grown into the field. She realized the field didn't just kill them, it merged them, their souls fueling the cursed blooms. Desperate, she slashed at them with her pocketknife, but it passed through them like mist. They flickered, illusions or half-spirits, unstoppable. "You can't fight us," the whisper said collectively, "the witch's curse binds all who breathe the fragrance. You will feed the blossoms, as they fed us." In a final surge of panic, Miranda recalled the stump with the carved symbols. Perhaps the locus of the curse. She dashed away from the ring, ignoring the clawing hands and moaning spirits. The watchers let out a collective wail, drifting in pursuit. She found the stump again quickly, though she had no sense of direction. The carved spiral glowed faintly. She felt its dark pulse. If only she could break it, or something. She seized a large rock, hammered at the stump's surface, splintering the wood. Each blow felt like driving a spike into her own mind. The watchers shrieked, the field roiling. With a final smash, she broke the spiral carving in half. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Then, an unearthly screech tore through the air, the blossoms around her trembling violently. The watchers convulsed, flickered. She collapsed, ears ringing, eyes blinded by swirling color. The perfume smell spiked to a sickening pitch, then vanished. She blacked out. When she came to, the sun was shining bright overhead. The field was normal, maybe. Or as normal as a field could be. The flowers were shorter, less oppressive. The watchers were gone. In the distance, she saw the outline of her aunt's farmhouse, as if the entire field had shrunk back to reveal the land again. Shaking, she stumbled through the blooms, no illusions hindering her. After a half-hour of trudging, she reached the property line, near a weathered fence. The house shimmered in the midday heat. Her aunt found her delirious, dehydrated, collapsed on the porch steps. Hours later, after some water and rest, Miranda managed to stammer out the story. Her aunt's face went pale, but she pressed no questions. She'd grown up hearing local legends of a witch centuries ago who cursed the land so it devoured souls. She never dreamed the curse might endure. Miranda packed her belongings the next morning and left. No one believed her full account. The farmland owners insisted the wildflowers were typical, the area safe. But that autumn, rumors circulated about travelers vanishing near that property. A mother and child who took a shortcut, never seen again. Another man found wandering, raving about monstrous blooms and ghosts, only to die of a fever soon after. Miranda's dreams remain haunted by the watchers with blossoms sprouting from their eyes. She can still taste that cloying scent if she closes her eyes and imagines tall purple flowers. She suspects she only escaped because she destroyed the carved spiral. But curses as old as that one rarely die so easily. Perhaps the field grows new runes, new illusions. She's certain the witch's magic pulses in the soil, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to inhale that lethal fragrance. So if you're ever in the countryside, and you catch the sweetest, strangest smell drifting on the wind, approach with caution. If you see a field of wildflowers standing unnaturally tall, shimmering with unusual colors, do yourself a favor, turn around. Because once you step between those rustling rows, the blossoms might ensnare your senses, luring you deeper until the watchers claim you. And you'll become just another soul weaving through the stems, your final breath feeding the cursed blooms that whisper eternally of a witch's old, unbroken spell.